Hey guys, it's Bao here, and I've created an updated investment guide for 7.3. As for my usual disclaimer, this guide may not be helpful if you're watching this like a year in the future. The meta moves very fast, so please keep that in mind. Now for new players, I'd like to note that you can't just choose one team and all in with it through every single content in the game. This is due to the weather system, which prioritizes Valkyrie element types and Valkyrie types. I'd also like to note that SP Valkyries are free in the Asterite shop, and when I say to pull for them, I mean that players should pull for the Stigmata and weapons, because those are usually not free unless I state otherwise. And don't treat my guide like an end-all be-all. Please use your own discretion to make the best decision for your own account, and also pull for supports before DPSs. They just last longer. Also, I'd like to just quickly note that I completely ripped the format off Keepster. He's been gone for a while now, so hopefully he doesn't get mad at me for doing this. Okay, so first to Senadina. Every new player should basically be pulling for the new Valkyries. This is a really cheap team to make, especially since you only need to pull for her weapon because her Stigmata are forgeable. She's basically the new Premier Stardust DPS as well as the new Premier Lightning DPS. New players can use her as a flex for Lightning Weathers, although Lunar Val is still better than her at that. She is also the only DPS Valkyrie that can utilize the Astral Ring system, which will be a new weather in the Abyss. Overall, she's very cheap relative to other S-rank Valkyries, and her team is very cheap to build as well. Helia is also a very cheap Valkyrie since her Stigmata is forgeable, so all you have to do is pull for her weapon since she's free from the story. You can also get free rank ups for her from the Asterite shop. She can also be used as a flex lightning support in place of Eden, although Eden is still much better than her at general lightning teams. Basically, if you're to pull Senadina, definitely pull for her weapon though. She's definitely worth it and very cheap. Coralie is literally free. You get her weapon from the story, and her Stigmata are forgeable or given for free in the login reward. The only thing you really have to do is just upgrade her weapon, so there's no reason not to use her in the Senadina team. She can also be used as a flex fire support, but Coralie does that role better. Next to the Herrscher of Rebirth, she's basically a must pull if you want to use a physical team. She is easily the strongest support for physical teams as well as the strongest side type physical DPS. You really do want her full gears though, and fortunately she can be used as a flex physical DPS for early game new players. Don't even think about using a physical team without having the Herrscher of Rebirth first. The Herrscher of Truth is what the Herrscher of Rebirth is to fire and lightning teams, but more specifically fire teams. She is basically mandatory for all fire teams, and you also kind of want her for Lunar Val DPS. Also for new players, she's a pretty good flex ice DPS, but you probably won't see her top score on anything. She's basically a must pull if you're actually interested in the meta. Otherwise, you can't just all-in-one Valkyrie and then brute force the other content in the game. Lunar Val kind of defies everything I've said. She's basically the only meta lightning DPS left, and she destroys Apponia, Mobius, and the Herrscher Thunder on all their bosses. You'll also see her in off-weather bosses in Memorial Arena and Abyss, and this is due to her extremely high raw damage. She is literally one of the strongest, if not the strongest DPSs in the game. Not to mention that she's a very strong lightning support that's on par with the Herrscher of Truth. She's definitely a worthy pickup. Now onto fire teams. I'm going to throw in the Herrscher Trio here because they do more fire damage than anything else. The Herrscher Trio team is actually still surprisingly pretty strong and a decent flex option, but it takes way too long to build the whole Herrscher Trio team from scratch now. I really wouldn't recommend using your crystals on them if you're missing a whole Valkyrie. I'd only recommend pulling anything if you're only missing something small like a weapon or like a few Stigmatas. The Herrscher Trio team is also a decent substitute to the Fang Huang of Vicissitude team, but otherwise we're only going to see them top score in imaginary niches. Both the Herrscher Finality and the Herrscher of Origin are decent flex DPSs, but they're not as strong as the meta DPSs. The Fang Huang of Vicissitude is the newest fire DPS released, and this patch is also tailor-made for her alongside Senadina. She's the strongest fire DPS and also the most relevant fire DPS. Assuming you have built Herrscher of Truth and Coralie, then she'll be a pretty meta pull. Senadina is a farmable S-rank Valkyrie, and her Stigmatas are also completely farmable. She covers the Ignite niche, and just like the Fang Huang of Vicissitude, needs Coralie and Herrscher of Truth to be built. Although she's a bit weak for an S-rank Valkyrie, her advantage in Ignite weathers is extremely strong. Since new players only have to pull for her weapon, she's not a bad pull by any means. Coralie is a support for all fire and Ignite teams. If you want to build a fire team, then you really need Coralie. However, unfortunately, she really wants her full set, and you can't settle for just 2 out of 3 Stigmata pieces. She has been out for a while now, so you might want to consider just putting Turgenev on her and wait for the next fire support. So now we're onto the lightning teams, and unfortunately there's only one thing to cover here. I already covered the 2 meta lightning DPSs, which are Senadina and Lunar Val, so unfortunately there's no other meta DPSs left. Technically, Mobius and Apponia still see some very niche use cases, but for the most part they're basically irrelevant now, unfortunately. So here's Eden. She's the meta SP lightning support. Her Stigmata is forgeable, and all you need to pull for is her weapon. You still need her in some Lunar Val teams alongside Cosmic Expression because of how the Memorial Arena system works, where they lock off already used Valkyries. Basically, she still sees some use in Memorial Arena. She can also be used as a support for Senadina alongside Lunar Val or Herrscher of Truth, and the Eden Senadina team does have some cases where it's better than the intended Senadina team. Basically, she's still pretty strong, but is starting to fall off a little bit. The Herrscher of Human is still the strongest ice teamist in the game, but unfortunately she's been out for a very long time now, so it's very likely that she'll be replaced soon. Just like any other DPS, she just wants her support to be built first, which includes Shigure Kira and Jade Knight. Next is the Herrscher of Reason. Her Stigmata is forgeable, and you do need to pull for her Divine Key though. Despite being a free S rank, I don't think she's relevant anymore, and she has very few bosses left. Shigure Kira is a very strong ice support, as well as a substitute for the Herrscher of Truth in elemental teams. Unfortunately, she is super reliant on Stigmata, and you do want her full set. You can't settle for just 2 out of 3. Additionally, you also need your weapon to apply Rhyme Trauma, which is what freezes enemies. If you can't get her full set, then just use Turgenev, because that's a pretty good alternative. However, keep in mind that her main set is much stronger. She is also basically mandatory for the Warden's boss because she does HP % damage. Jade Knight is also basically mandatory for ice teams, and she is extremely reliant on her weapon. If you don't have her weapon, don't even try building her. Without her weapon, you'll never get enough SP regen to ult. Additionally, her full Stigmata set provides a great amount of shield break damage as well, so you definitely want her Stigmata set if possible. She also provides shield breaking buffs for ice teams, and you kind of need her for shielded up mobs. Next is Dreamweaver. She's basically the premier physical DPS currently. This is going to apply for all physical DPSs, but she's basically unusable without the Herrscher of Rebirth or the Herrscher of Sentience support. She is also unfortunately not much stronger than a triple support team. In fact, the triple physical support team might be just as strong as her in her best bosses. Definitely not a mandatory pull, and unfortunately kind of weak actually. Next is Susanna, a surprisingly strong SP Valkyrie for a DPS. She covers both Bleed Brothers and Physical Brothers very well actually, although Lunar Vow is not too far behind in terms of Bleed Brothers. Her Stigmata set is also a very strong bleed support set for the Herrscher of Rebirth. If you're a new player, you don't have to pull for her weapon and Stigmata set, but you should consider building her just for the early game physical weathers. Overall, a very strong Valkyrie, but hasn't seen much use lately. Next is the Herrscher of Sentience. In terms of support, she's completely outclassed by the Herrscher of Rebirth now. For new players who got her for free though, you can try putting Nebulous Duality on her and using her as a placeholder support. Although you should still aim to use Herrscher of Rebirth in the end as a support. As for DPS, she's actually pretty strong, but she does need her weapon and her Pericles set. She also needs a bunch of rank ups to match the top players. For new players, I'd say just don't roll for her new set in her brick. And once again, she does need the Herrscher of Rebirth and other supports. Next is Prometheus. She's the premier physical support for non-bleed teams. She has the best shield breaking capacity in the entire game, and you definitely need her for shielded physical bosses. Her Stigmata set is also pretty important for SS bosses in Memorial Arena. Basically, just pull for her gears if you want a strong physical team. Next is Starry Impression. She is still very strong for triple physical support teams, and she still sees some usage in Memorial Arena thanks to her leader skill. She's kind of in a weird spot right now because she's technically power crept by Cosmic Expression for bleed teams and power crept by Terminal Aid for physical teams. For new players though, just don't build her, she's too niche now. Finally, we have Cosmic Expression. She can be used as a bleed DPS, but her main role is a bleed support for both Susanna and Lunar Vow. Although she doesn't support that many teams, she will most likely be a very long-lasting Valkyrie due to her niche. I'd say just pull for her gears if you want to have a strong Lunar Vow or strong Susanna team. Any future bleed Valkyries will most likely also use her as a support. So that concludes this investment guide. I tried to keep it pretty brief for all the new players that are coming in. Hopefully this was helpful to you guys, and please do leave a like and subscribe and comment if this helped you. I don't like begging for this kind of interaction, but I spent a really long time making this, even if the video is kind of short. So yeah. My explanations for every single Valkyrie are also pretty short and concise, so do feel free to leave a comment asking me any questions if you're just confused on my placements or like why I chose a Valkyrie should be invested in or not. For anyone else who skipped here just to see who I think the best Valkyries are, I'll keep it simple. Roll for Senadina, Helia, Coralie, they're really cheap. And then the really strong pulls are the Herrscher of Rebirth, Herrscher of Truth, and Lunar Vow. There you go.